Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Habitual Excellence. I'm Mark Raven from Value Capture. We're joined today. We have two guests and we have a guest host for the conversation here today. So first off, we are joined by Benita Pope and Cooper Linton. They both work for Duke HomeCare and Hospice at Duke University Health System. Benita is the Director of Hospice Services and Cooper is Associate Vice President. So first off, Benita and Cooper, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Happy to be on. Thank you for having this conversation with us.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that we're doing the conversation. I'm going to be more of a listener today because we are also joined by Mike Radtke from the Value Capture team. He is a senior advisor. He has been working with Cooper and Benita for a while, so he's going to lead some of that discussion. But I know a little bit of the story, and we'll link to this in the show notes. You can read a white paper about some of the great work done at Duke HomeCare and Hospice, a white paper titled Continuous Learning Leads to Continuous Improvement, and we'll invite people to check that out. But Mike, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you, Mark. Doing well. And let me just start by saying any day I can spend in a physical or virtual room with Benita and Cooper is a good day. So thanks for making it a good day, you two.
You are kind. We feel the same way. At least I do.
Yes, absolutely.
So the only question I'm going to ask before getting out of the way is in terms of introductions. And if Benita and Cooper, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role. Benita, if you'd like to go first, please.
Okay. All right. I'm the director with our home health, our hospice program, and that consists of some components of an inpatient hospice unit. We've got a 12-bed unit. We have our community program where we care for our hospice patients in the home. And we also have partner programs where we have contracts with skilled nursing facilities in our community that we can provide hospice care.
All right, thanks, Benita. And Cooper.
Well, I'm the Associate Vice President for Duke HomeCare Hospice and Duke Home Infusion. And I have the privilege of working with folks like Benita as we look at how do we deliver community-based care, whether it be home health and hospice in a 9-county area in the central part of North Carolina, or home infusion across 3 states. We serve Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and have our own compounding infusion pharmacy. And so it all sounds like community-based care, but it's very different ways of delivering community-based care. I'll also say that Benita was our champion for lean processes internally. It's her role with us spanned all 3 programs, and really she became a coach and teacher in the process for all of us. So it's a real gift to have her.
Good. Well, it's great to meet you both. And Mike, let me kind of turn things over to you to help lead the conversation here.
Great. We're Cooper and Benita. So the journey for Duke HomeCare Hospices of, let's say, transformation has been going on for a number of years now since the two of you have been in place. But one thing primarily that we spent quite a bit of time focusing on is focusing on zero harm and safety. So at Duke HomeCare and Hospice, what does focusing on zero harm look like?
I'll start then with that. For us, what it looked like before, I can kind of say, it was a place where we were reacting basically a lot of times to just audits. You get results, and then we responded in a kind of reactionary manner. Now it looks like where we bring forth the front line to give us their knowledge of what's considered potential harm, potential risk to patients, to families, and to each other. It becomes an environment now where we are doing real-time problem solving when things are identified. It's not put on a shelf and let's meet next month about this when we go through performance improvement. It's let's talk about what's going on now. Let's look at, did we eliminate the harm that's going on at this moment? And then how do we look to prevent that from spreading any further? Have we contained? So it's a lot more energy towards real-time problem solving, and it's not leaders problem solving. It's that frontline staff presenting and problem solving with us. Much different.
It is different. And, one of the things that we unfortunately know about community-based care is not only do we see harms to our patients because they're often in very uncontrolled environments, but we know that the risk for visiting staff, regardless of what their role is materially higher in home and community-based care than it is in most other formal settings or institutionalized settings of care. One of the things that has changed now is that if an employee starts, we hire a new employee on, say, Monday morning. In the first hour that they are on board with us, they are hearing about the safety huddles. They're hearing about our priority on safety, our focus on their safety, as well as the safety of our patients, because we don't believe that they're different, actually. You can't deliver safe care if you are not in a safe environment in which to exercise your professional expertise. And so within the first 60 minutes that an employee comes to Duke HomeCare, Hospice, or Home Infusion, they're hearing that, and they're hearing it top down. They're hearing it as the priority that we want them to walk into their first day understanding. And that's a shift, but it's a shift that I think, I guess my question is, who can't support that? Why would we ever not be in a position of supporting the safety of our staff and our patients?
Yeah, so setting the tone right away with new folks, as well as having processes built in that invites them to bring problems forward, invites them to participate in the problem solving. That's just awesome. So as far as for you personally as a leader, what has this changed from over the past couple of years? What has that caused you to change in the way that you lead?
For me, it's opened the door to not feeling like I had to have the answer for everything as a leader. It is to sit back and coach and be coached because it's an ever evolving thing. So again, that is how I think I've grown as a leader, because I think we've grown up with that mentality that that's how you lead, know everything. It's also provided me open doors to help chain, to people not only in my unit, but in the health system. And it's really opened my eyes and the eyes of the team to the fact that we have all of these resources to support each other. Let's utilize them, because again, we can coach each other and build from each other and learn from each other as we are all going through this process of committing to zero. Yeah.
I would agree, Benita. I think, up until a couple of years ago, and part of this is the lean processes. Part of this is that we started these lean processes as our organization went into a pandemic. And so it's caused us to really reflect on what is our role as leaders. And I think historically, I felt like my job was to accumulate as much knowledge and experience as I could. And the more tools that I had collected, the more valuable I was, if that makes sense. And I began to realize, I think that's a really flawed approach, that in reality, my role is to be this continuous adaptive learner whose job it is to learn and support and coach, but also to learn and be coached, to your point, Benita, that we are not the ones that walk in the door with all the answers. There's no playbook for some of the work that we do. And so where are we going to find that? And if we're going to be on the leading edge of care, we're not going to be able to Google the answer to this. We're going to have to go through this self-discovery process with our staff, where many times our staff are teaching us about their needs. And our job is to find ways to support them. And are we leading? Well, it depends on how you define lead. I think it really redefines the way that phrase is used and turns the lens around on what we're supposed to be doing and hearing and how we demonstrate support, care, and respect for our staff.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about at Value Capture often is principle-based leadership, and this notion of leading with humility. And that's one of the things from day one that one of the many things that I love about both of you and your leadership is just the humility that you bring to the table of, hey, we're here to learn something new, and we're here to help and develop and coach and teach our people, and we don't have to have all the answers. But that's not always easy. I would imagine that's not always easy based off of how many leaders are brought up in the health systems that they're in, that we get rewarded for having the answer, that it feels somewhat satisfying to have sometimes an answer, even though it may or may not be a great one. And you mentioned earlier about how you bring on new employees and setting the stage for this is how we focus on safety and how we improve at Duke HomeCare and Hospice. Looking at a principle like humility, how does that, and the importance of it, how does that change how you think about bringing on new leaders to your organization?
Well, I think it may even start before we bring them on. It begins to change the way what type of talent we look for. How do we bring someone on? How do we onboard them? But the question is, who did we seek out to be part of this? And are we vetting people who are technically savvy, or are we vetting people that have, to your point, the principles of leadership that we value? Because we're going to be asking them to do things in the coming years that they actually don't know how to do. I mean, if you think, how many of us have learned how to manage healthcare during a pandemic? Well, we've learned it by doing it, but not,
Right.
18 months ago, what did I know about operating in a pandemic? I read a couple of articles, mostly not related to our own healthcare system, and was woefully unprepared. Had no experience whatsoever for how to do this. So are we bringing people on that have the nimbleness, the humility, the willingness to learn, the willingness to be led, the willingness to lead, but without a belief that they're always right? Are we seeking people who have that philosophical alignment with our culture and then looking for technical skill, or are we trying to find technical skill people we just hope they'll fit in? And I think we've got to be very intentional about hiring for cultural competency and emotional intelligence. We can teach somebody the Medicare rules, but we're not likely to rewire who they are. So I hope that didn't evade your question, Mike. I was trying to sidestep it without looking like I was.
No, no, I think that was well said, Cooper. Yeah, and kind of a related question, but Benita, you're in a position where you've got, oftentimes, so you have some great people working for you, but oftentimes in your position, you end up often with some people new to the role of leadership. So they may have been in a role where they were, a strong clinician. Mm-hmm. And now it's time they've shown some aspiration and some desire to become leaders. Mm-hmm. What do you do in that situation when you have somebody new into a leadership role? What do you see as your role in helping to support their development around these principles?
Yeah, one of the tools that you actually, taught us to use is leader standard work. And that's sometimes getting them the understanding of these things are going to be needed to help you be successful in this model. Parts of it is the listening piece of it and the observation. I mean, looking at process observation as we implement new standard work. Is it really being done? Or is it just us putting together these work groups and these teams coming up with ideas? How do we ensure that this is actually happening? So that level of reinforcement and also understanding the real value of this model, which one, for me, is the fact that I can come in and not spend all day trying to figure out where are my priorities that I've got to focus on. I'm going to know that by 10:30, 11 o'clock at the latest, based on the at minimum 2 huddles I go to, but I can participate in other tier 1 huddles. But I don't spend all day looking for staff to try to figure that stuff out. We're together. And that to me is just a valuable part that leaders can take away from this, knowing that now the rest of my day can really be spent on real-time problem solving and helping to make sure my staff are developed, or what are their needs as we're rolling out all of these new things.
Oh, that's great. So speaking of staff,
Mm-hmm.
so you mentioned that early on that part of the intent of this is so that staff are the ones who see the problems, so they have an avenue and an opportunity to bring those things forward as well as participate in the problem solving. So in order to make things safer for them and for their patients. So what you've seen from your staff over the last 18 months, how have they responded? And it might be just staff as well as other key stakeholders, physicians, other folks. How have they responded to these different approaches to the focus on safety, as well as how you've engaged them?
I think overall they've responded very well, because I know they see this as people truly care what I have to say. I'm able to bring it up. I have a platform and I can see where it's going as it's going through our priority list. I can see that we're getting to some resolution to some things. The communication is much better, because when it doesn't work, we've got to look again and act again on that. So I think they're seeing improved communication, that they have an avenue and a voice to get things heard, and that there's a sense that people do care about what's going on or potentially could go on regarding my safety, the safety of my patients and my families. Because if something happens in a community, we'll know about it in that morning. So anyone going in that community can be aware that we've got a safety concern here. This is the plan. Who's going in? And we can have that conversation. And by 8:30 that morning, that team is aware of what's going on.
When we started this, Mike, I think there was a lot of skepticism and actually some resistance, because let me get this right. I've already got a busy day scheduled out in the field, and you want me to come in and talk to you for 15 minutes or Zoom in because Benita wisely was able to convert this to a largely virtual platform, which we've now rolled out across all our clinical operations. So you want me to take 15 minutes, and then the leaders are saying, oh, and I need another 15 minutes for this tier and another 15 minutes. I don't have time for that. You're not going to do anything with it anyway. That was the skepticism. And we had to own that and have some vulnerability in hearing that concern and criticism. I don't think you're going to tell people to trust you. You show people to trust you. And so we began to demonstrate the need for them to share with us by taking what they were saying and saying, your need is now our number one priority. We are the people that are supposed to support you in your work. So whatever it is I had planned at 11 o'clock today is now canceled, because I'm fully committed to making sure that you have the PPE that you need, or that we are addressing the infectious disease protocols that you need, or that there are supplies out there, or that we need to work with one of our community partners differently. And, people began to realize that what was being discussed first thing in the morning was prioritized. And Benita led the way on that, to where people saw that happening in real time. And folks don't spend long waiting to cast judgment. They don't spend long trying to figure out whether you're going to do what you said you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And that has allowed us to say, okay, hey, we own it when we get it right. We own it when we get it wrong, but we always own it. We move forward. And they saw us prioritizing these things. And the response times, instead of things happening in 3 weeks, they were happening in 3 hours. Well, you do that a few times and you start to get people's attention.
Yeah.
You don't have to say, trust me anymore. Now they want to dial in because guess what else? I got a lot of, now that you're in the business of fixing things for me, I got a lot of other stuff you can fix for me. I can't wait to get on tier 1 and tell you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because now the language is like a different language. And it's like, are you going to be escalating that to tier 3, which is to Cooper's level? So it's like, I think this is going to need to be escalated.
Benita and I have not had a chance to talk about this morning, but I stopped by our inpatient hospice facility this morning, stuck my head in on one of the nurses in the halls, because you can't always catch them because a lot of times they're involved in direct patient care. I said, how are things going? And they said, well, we're working through this issue. And I got a lesson in how they were handling tier 1 issues, our first level of safety huddles, how they were addressing issues about community spread of COVID-19, which is going up in our community like it is in many communities in the country, and what were our safety protocols and how we were addressing some changes. And actually the gentleman said, are you going to be on tier 1 with us this morning? And I said, well, that depends. Do you need me to? He goes, no, not really. He said, you're welcome to, but no, we've got this. Okay. Now, for me, I look at that and I had enormous pride in the work of our staff. I can look at it the other way and what do you mean you don't need me? I'm the so-and-so. You don't need me. No, actually, they don't need me because the structure is in place to take care of these issues before they ever got to where we, quote, needed somebody else's help. They got it.
That's great. That's awesome. That's really what the end goal is. You build the system so that it exists even when you're not there.
Now, I will share that on tier 3 today, that issue had escalated to tier 3 at 10:30 this morning. And just as that gentleman suggested, it was already resolved. But we were made aware of it. We tracked it. There's visibility to it, but our staff had already solved this problem. They weren't waiting for us to put it on our agenda and have a meeting a week from now so that we could come up with minutes and send it back to them, tell them what we did, signed it, because that's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to just focus on is the fact that, Benita, you're in an interesting place where you have the inpatient unit, which maybe more functions like a classic healthcare setting. You've got 4 walls, you've got internal processes, you've got 24/7 care, but then you also support home hospice. So as you started with looking at focusing on zero harm, focusing on a lot of these practices around identifying and solving issues, and took it from more of a traditional healthcare setting to home, you had to make some adaptations along the way to make it work for you. Can you describe a little bit about some of the process of adapting some of these processes to really make it work in a fairly unique but important setting within healthcare?
Yeah. So knowing that we were going to be transitioning this into the home program, we had our leaders from the home program already starting in and shadowing the tier 1s that we were doing in the IPU, knowing that there would be things we could take and things we would have to leave. For us in the home, we had to start with technology. How are we going to do this? Because everybody's not going to be in the office, and COVID did a fine job right before we went live, we went into that. So it became that we had to have virtual, but we were already in place to have virtual. So we got technology set up, got our setting in the office set up. We talked about communication. And one big part was identifying what are going to be the outcomes we're looking at in the home, because they're going to be different than what we're looking at in the inpatient unit. Falls for us, for instance, became, it was a harm event for us. Whether they actually got an injury in the home or not. We wanted to know about it so we can kind of look at that situation and contain it before another injury could, because the risk is there. So before an injury could happen. So, we looked at what are the outcomes we need to do. Access was another thing. How do we really get patients access? Within 24 hours is, where we were starting. So again, setting up what are the different objectives? How can we do this from a virtual platform? Do we have the capability from a clinician, from a laptop standpoint, or a phone if they're calling in? And so how do we start to set these things up? So most of it was logistics and just technology, which ended with a webcam being set up in a central location at the office. So pretty simple at the end of the day.
Well, and what I really appreciate about that is oftentimes when people go and see what someone else is doing, they could look at it, and it's because of their world is a bit different. They could look at it and say, well, that's not going to work here. But I think what you did and living through this transition is, all right, that exactly won't work here. But what about what you practice within the inpatient unit really applies well here? What do we have to change to kind of preserve the intent? So our outcomes are different. What are our outcomes? We have these daily tiered huddle board and a huddle process. Well, that's not going to work exactly that way. But the fact that we want to have all staff be able to voice their concerns, identify issues, make sure that we're escalating things, hear about what we're problem solving, engaging in that shouldn't only be for people who work in a inside a box. That should be for anybody who works anywhere. It's just a matter of we have to adapt on how we make that work. So that's sure something that you've experienced not only in home hospice, but in home care, in the infusion center, and a lot of places is how do you take some of the principles and key practices and make them work for you?
And it was definitely trial and error. We used different software to try to come up with what became our final board, which is in a smart sheet, which we had not used before to do any type of group work and sharing, but it became an excellent tool for us to utilize in a virtual model.
So Benita won't toot her horn on this, but I would like to lean in on it for a second. There is this rapidly iterative process that this went through. There was, we're going to do one board, then we're going to try a different board. And so Benita's also very gifted with technology, and next thing you knew, she had created a model, and then that got improved, and that improvement got improved. And so we would try something, we get everybody's feedback, and then it just quickly began to constantly evolve and change. There was a change made this past week in the way some of the hospice data was being shared. And we've been doing this for a while, but there's still little tweaks that go on because we found that we needed to know something different, or we needed to present the information in a more understandable format. So she's made these changes very, very quickly. And by leading that, other leaders within the organization began to say, hey, I can change mine quickly too. We spend a whole lot of time being afraid of getting something wrong and we'll spend forever trying to perfect something before we ever try it. As opposed to saying, let's have a little courage, not suggesting that we're rash, but let's be a little bold and go ahead and roll something out intentionally that we acknowledge has a high degree of likelihood of being imperfect, with the absolute commitment that we are going to refine those imperfections quickly. And if those don't work, we'll refine them further. And the situation changes, and what was perfect a year ago isn't perfect today, so we've got to change with it anyway. Let's acknowledge that, embrace that lack of perfection, and really be focused on how do we evolve quickly. And that's really how our staff became engaged, because they realized I can pick up my phone now that everything's on a smart sheet and everything's on a Zoom. I can grab one of my phones that we give our staff out in the field like everybody does, and they can be face-to-face engaged, real time, having their voice heard and seeing the same data that the rest of us are seeing. And they can do that in less than 15 minutes a day. Works quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said, both of you said so many great things about the importance of experimentation, of testing, but being open at the same time to fail and fail quickly and learn from that. And I think you can easily tell outsiders listening in on, you know, some of these attributes of both humility, willing to fail, experiment, that really when you embody those attributes as a leader, how that really helps your folks improve, because they don't have that fear of, well, is this going to work or is this not going to work? Well, you create the conditions where you make it safe to say, hey, let's give that a try. Let's test something. It may or may not work, but we're going to learn something through this. So that was really well said.
So Mike, one of the things that I think holds us up at times is, are we afraid of how something may not work? Or are we more afraid of how we might look when it doesn't? And we let our, well, I have to know that I have to be right. If my image of myself as a leader is based on the perception, self-imposed or otherwise, that I have to be right, then the risk of being wrong becomes so profound that it acts as a cognitive straitjacket that precludes us from having the nimbleness to do what we need to do. And we become self-bound through self-identity, as opposed to saying, I actually don't have to be right. And by the way, I'm not many times. So let's just acknowledge that, get it off the table as an expectation, and see if we can mutually find out how to make it righter today. Because we may find out 3 days from now that that wasn't actually right either. It was better than it was. But again, we will iteratively improve. I don't know. It's a lot about how we think about ourselves and our roles, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So anyway, last question I have for you is, since you've been on quite the journey over the last 2-3 years, I've learned, no question, I've learned a lot, experienced even more. For your colleagues, your peers, let's say within home care and hospice, who may be listening in and thinking, okay, that sounds good. We'd love to focus more on safety. We'd love to engage our people more. We see real value in that, improving rapidly. It all sounds good. What advice would you have for them who might be sitting there at home and listening to this podcast?
My advice is, you can't stay. Most situations, our teams can't stay where they are. In order to survive in the industry we're in now, in the healthcare industry, with what we're seeing in the community, and for the patients we take care of, we need to have the voice of our staff members heard, because they know where the harm is potentially going to happen. It's through their eyes and their mouths we're going to learn where we need to focus in order to keep them safe and to take care of our patients. This is the best way that the best environment I've worked in where we've been able to do that in a time frame that's actually doable, to hear this on a daily basis. And now it's become so ingrained, we can't even imagine how do we function not doing it this way. So it is definitely a part of who we are now.
That's great. Cooper?
Couldn't agree more with what Benita said. I think my question for someone who's thinking about this is, are you afraid of trying it because you might fail? And are you equally afraid of accepting the risk of the status quo? We tend to underestimate the risk of our status quo and underestimate that and greatly overestimate the risk of what will happen if I try something differently. The other part is that I would encourage people to reach out to an organization who's done this before. We keep talking about coaches. We all need coaches. We have no problem putting a coach on the sideline at our kids' game. But we have some great reticence, again, about how will I look if I bring someone in and say, will you coach me? Will you listen to me? Will you give me feedback? So that I can get a sense of how I come across in this situation. And we've got to remove this fear if we truly want to have rapid cycle change. Because to Benita's point, our status quo, our staying put, is not an option anymore. It just isn't. So the question is, how are you going to change? How will you adapt to that? And how are we emotionally preparing our teams to create a culture that embraces that, nurtures it, develops it, and does it well?
And if I could, I want to tap into what Cooper was saying in regards to coach, because Mike, you were our coach. And the way, and I described it to someone, you helped us build a house. I mean, it was a new program. You gave us the foundation. We could not have built that foundation without your guidance, and kind of just really redirecting us to think, pushing us to think differently and questioning us, why are we doing it this way? Why? And how do you get down to this level of understanding that with 90% confidence that this is going to make a change? And we challenge each other that way. And it is, as Cooper said, it is challenging to leaders to shift and think differently. I still face challenges from time to time, and we have to coach each other through it. But you were pretty much a vital part of us this being successful. I will say that with 99% confidence.
Amen.
Well, thank you. But those who are watching and listening to the two of you can imagine how enjoyable it was for me, getting to spend time with two of you. So absolute pleasure. Mark, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Cooper and Benita, for really bringing this all to life in a way. Like, it was great to read the white paper. It's even better to hear you speaking about it, and so I do encourage people to go check out the white paper. It's titled "Continuous Learning Leads to Continuous Improvement." We've heard about that today. I just want to read a sentence from the introduction to the white paper to maybe try to further draw people in to go check it out. But it says that the agency reduced nurse turnover by 50%, decreased billing delays by more than 2/3, and improved the reporting and capture of data for in-home patient safety. So those are some great results. And I'm sure from what we've heard about today, those results will keep accumulating and moving forward as you're leading in this new way. So just want to say thank you for sharing that today. We've been joined, our guests from Duke HomeCare and Hospice, again, been Benita Pope and Cooper Linton. So thank you again for sharing your stories today.
Thank you.
And to Mike Radtke, thank you for the work that you've done and the coaching you've provided. And thank you for doing a great job with the podcast here today and leading that conversation.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks.
All right. Thanks again.